So it is my pleasure to introduce a frequent Wednesday evening participant and a champion of these calls within her organization, Heidi Schaefer. Heidi is a licensed master's level psychologist who's been part of Community Hospital's crisis team since 1990. She received a bachelor's in psychology at Purdue and a master's in clinical psychology from Illinois State. Heidi has several years' experience in evaluating patients and mentoring new crisis workers. Her current role is psychiatric admissions coordinator for Community's 147 psychiatric beds. Heidi spends each day fielding requests from local counselors and hospitals seeking admission for crisis stabilization. Apart from work, Heidi has led a Zoom study of the Get Your Life book by John Eldredge, advocating 1-minute pause and the concept of benevolent detachment. Most recent activities to unwind for Heidi include working on jigsaw puzzles, playing with rescue cat Nina, and learning Latin. Welcome, Heidi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. All right. And I don't know, have any of you ever heard of the concept of centering prayer or CP? New? Oh, good. Something new. Okay. So I'd like to introduce you to this mindfulness technique that I've been practicing for 10 years and has been helpful to me to stay centered and less stressed as I've navigated my own cancer journey, parenthood. Right now I have 2 teenagers and an emotionally demanding job. This is called centering prayer, and the concept appeared in 1975 when 3 monks, especially Thomas Keating, developed it as a modern method of contemplative prayer. And this approach to prayer has actually been around since at least the 14th century. Rather than thinking about prayer as you talking and asking for different blessings, what you are doing is practicing silence to be open to these blessings. I personally find silence very healing. In fact, today I have a new nurse that I'm working with, and she said to me, she goes, yesterday was so stressful in crisis, I actually drove all the way home in complete silence. And I told her, I do that a lot. That's actually very healthy. So I know that we tend to live a lot in our heads. We worry about things, we plan for the future, and then we regret about things we've been through in the past. We don't focus a lot on the present, on the here and now. And then when we try to do that, we get distracted and our mind will tend to jump from thought to thought. And that's kind of my mode at work in crisis. That's what I have to do. But I think you also need to know how to turn that off and just sort of center yourself in the present moment. Because when you do that too much of jumping around, at least for me, I can get very anxious and then it will spill over and I'm less patient with people that I work with or on the phone. And then I feel guilty about that. And then I don't feel physically well and get tense and just this really unhealthy cycle. I find centering prayer to be like a healing balm that it invites God into a time of quiet meditation, but there is no pressure. You don't have a particular goal that you're striving for with centering prayer. The recommended dosage of it is 20 minutes twice a day, which I think sounds totally impossible. But get this, I found out we actually have a chapel at our hospital. We have more than one. And when I was going through cancer treatment and having radiation, I found out 30 minutes lunch break, that's 5 minutes to walk over to the chapel, 20 minutes of centering prayer, 5 minutes back. it helped immensely. I mean, so I ate at my desk. I do that anyway. Nowadays, what I do is I'll do it on weekends, and I think that's helpful, but it would be better if I could do it during the week. So this approach is very simple. The goal is to stay open and empty for several minutes in a row. I know you may think that sounds like an easy task. But like I said, I mean, our minds right now are trained by smartphones, and we've learned to jump from task to task and kind of skim the surface. How often do we actually read something in an article all the way through? We don't do that very often. So to say I'm going to take 20 minutes and completely empty my mind is a real challenge. So I'm going to show you, there's an app for this, like there's an app for everything else, and it's called Centering Prayer. And this is kind of hard, but you can look it up on the App Store. What I wanted to show you is you can customize it. It has all these options. You can pick your prayer. You can pick your sounds for how you start it, how you end it. You can pick the duration. You can do 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You can choose all these things and set it up in the way that is helpful and supportive for you. And what I try to do is I change my theme on a regular basis for this. So let me kind of walk through how this goes. Like you were saying earlier, Robert, it's you need to feel supported and comfortable in how you're sitting. I tend to sit cross-legged on the floor, and I have my hands up and open, kind of on my knees. And I try to pick a relatively quiet time of day. I really like late morning. And then I'll start off reading my opening prayer, and I'll set the timer for 20 minutes. What I do is I can't just jump into that and then suddenly be empty and open. I need like a transition time. So I kind of shut things down one after another. I'll start off with my mind and try to kind of get that focused. And so for me, the phrase that I use is I will say, turn unto the light and wait for the Lord. And when I'm saying that, I'm usually thinking of a quiet place, a chapel, some soft light, and I do like to sit in the sun. So if my eyes peek open, I can see some sun on me too. But I'll do that. And then I'll focus on my breathing. So I'll take a few breaths and I'll intentionally pay attention to it. And maybe I'll add to my breathing out and in the thought of I'm going to breathe in grace and I'm going to breathe out praise. And I may think that a couple of times. So I'm initially paying attention to that on purpose, and then I don't pay attention to it anymore. And I just let my mind stay open. And I know in these meetings we've talked about the phrase intention or the word intention. That is kind of what we're going to do because there's no goal. It's an intention of practicing to keep your mind uncluttered so that then you're available to God's direction. And I think the bigger idea of this is so you do it as a habit, 20 minutes every day. You'll find you'll be able to tap into it when you're not doing it. It enables you to accidentally be centered at other times. And today I was able to do it. So I really appreciate the practice being useful. So that's the intention. So I kind of stay on relaxed alert during this time because eventually you're going to notice that you're having a thought. Usually for me, it's about the future, sometimes the past or the present. And what you say to yourself when you catch yourself noticing that you're starting to think about something is you can say return or the word open or both. And that brings me back to a place where there's nothing that I'm thinking about. And you may do that repeatedly. We're going to practice this for a few minutes. You may do it once a minute. You're like, oh, and you don't get upset at yourself or say, darn, you just go, oh, okay, so return and open, and you do it again. And what you'll find is when you do return and you have that feeling of being centered and empty, it's just delightful. It's almost like dark chocolate or something that you really like. It's really enjoyable. It's worth it. So are you guys all right with trying this for a few minutes? Okay. Um, so I already have this set, and I'm going to share with you the phrase that I'm currently using is from Isaiah 30, verse 15. So we're going way back, and I think it's perfect for mindfulness. So get kind of comfortable, and I'll read the phrase to you, and then you're going to hear a sound that tells you we're going to start the practice, and we're going to do it for 5 minutes. Okay? So the phrase is, by waiting and by calm, you shall be saved. In quiet and in trust, your strength lies. I'm used to 20 minutes, so that startled me. um, let's see. Oh, there are times when my mind feels really cluttered anyway, and so during that 20 minutes, just as a tip, I'll kind of do a reset, and I might, stretch my neck a little bit and start over. Um, so I wanted to, before we talk about the experience, I just wanted to tell you how this is being used, and also I will add to the chat um, some information about the organization. It's called contemplativeoutreach.org, and it provides resources and examples of how centering prayer has been utilized. One area that's been utilized a lot is in prison populations. There is a prison outreach team which teaches this technique to inmates and provides post-release community to help them continue the practice. It's also being used in 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. I think it's maybe the 11th step. And then there are chapters that meet regularly to practice this, usually by Zoom. The one here in Indianapolis has been around for a while. This is a global movement. So you can find probably a ton of chapters in California. I have not participated in a local chapter, but they do global centering prayer times. And during the pandemic, maybe it's been already a year ago, I participated in one of those that was just awesome. There was the hope of, by having a whole group of people doing this for 20 minutes, that would support some peace and calm during the pandemic and during Black Lives Matter. And I was very moved by being able to do this with a group of other people like that. So I really enjoyed it. So do you have some questions for me or some feedback? Anything that you want to talk about? Go ahead. You're muted. There you go.
Thank you so much. That was such a great practice. I am in, training for meditation, teacher training through Engage Mindfulness Institute, which is one of the part of the umbrella organizations for the Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety. And so often we talk about how the work that we're doing is secular and that it, can apply, that it's not necessarily Buddhist, but that it can apply to all religions. And then when I work more with public safety, Christianity is going to tend to be, which is how I was raised, is going to be tend to be more common. But I've never really been connected to resources nor had a practice necessarily that was kind of this Christian based contemplative practice. And so I'm so grateful to kind of have that expansion of knowledge about the practice, but then also with the practice itself, really kind of releasing a lot of the expectations of myself that sometimes I do put on myself in another meditative practice. Really was quite freeing in a very, very pleasant and kind of open 5 minutes. And so thank you on both of those accounts for a wonderful practice and for helping me understand how I might be able to really better direct people who I'm teaching to something that could be a comparative meditative practice for that's out of a Christian tradition. So thank you. This was awesome.
You're welcome. I'm glad you liked it.
So much.
I will add some things to the chat so you can pursue this. And what I like about it is it's flexible, it's modifiable. They do have a warning to not do it too close to bedtime or you can't fall asleep, and they're right. I think when you do it for a 20-minute period, it changes your brain waves, very similar to meditation. And you really just can't go to sleep then. It's sort of like another form of rest and kind of healing that you do. So yeah, and I do want to mention this other book. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this book. Can you read that? It's called Bored and Brilliant. I listen to NPR and Manoush Zamoradi. She's a podcast host, but some of these concepts of being completely open and not multitasking, but practicing that during the day, sort of pulling the centering prayer mindset into your day, you'd be surprised the things that just pop up when you are not trying to do everything at once. So I like that idea too, the bored and brilliant concept.
Heidi, this is Kimball. So I work with you. We work together at the same place, and I can certainly attest to the frenetic pace of your work. And I think almost the act of walking to another location, it's a bridge, and it prepares you to calm down, and it prepares you to ramp back up, because when you come back to work after something like that, you got to be back on it, and at that pace, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to bother you, I guess is what I'm saying. So I really like the fact that you go to physically another space in a building.
Yeah, I always tell my coworkers, I said, it's not the food that is the break. It's the getting away from the bubble. It's like an emergency room. And if anyone's ever been to an emergency room, you go back there out of triage in the waiting room, it's not relaxing.
No, you're exactly right.
Somebody's yelling, people are running around. I mean, you have to step out and let everything decompress before you can dive back in again. Yeah, and after being in that environment, this is my 32nd year. I keep telling every new person, I tell them this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. Leave, go take a break, come back. And it is a marathon because you need to be available and have your act together and not bring in all your anxiety and baggage to this space. You got to be ready to help other people and be open and the whole ball of wax. So this is one of my tools that I use. It's not the only tool, but I think it has helped me survive.
Yes, Heidi, thank you as well for what you presented to us. I normally do the 20 minutes just by stepping back from the computer, because we're always, plugged into the computer. And I was told that it's best to take 20 minutes, take your glasses off, kind of relax, breathe, and take some time to do something else and then go back to the computer. Tell me that you use scripture. Well, tell me what I wrote a question down here. What are some of your themes that you come up with as you pray? Because I saw as you were using Isaiah and other. What are some of your themes that you use?
Well, what's interesting to me is the idea of contemplative prayer and listening and quieting your heart is mentioned repeatedly in Old Testament and New Testament. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot in there. If you look at the app, that was helpful because it has a whole bunch of lists of different scriptures. I look for short ones because I don't want to read something. I just want a theme of being still and knowing that God. I mean, something that just sort of sets the groundwork. So as you're doing the different choices on the app, I usually pick a short one. But every time one of the themes of contemplation, there's a lot of times that Jesus will just up and leave. They're at one place, but he's like, let's go to the next place, or I'm going to go off over here and be by myself for a while.
Yeah.
He does really good self-care. I don't know if he's gone for 20 minutes, 20 hours, an hour, but he would do that a lot. And I doubt if he was sitting there talking the whole time. You know, I think he was just centering himself and opening himself. And he had a lot of demands, just like ER physicians have a lot of demands. And, you know, how do you make yourself available to the next person who needs you? Well, you need to empty yourself and get centered to do that. And so I think, you know, how Jesus handled stress is a really good way, a good model for us. But yeah, in the Old Testament, there's a lot about your heart and meditating and keeping it open.
Sure.
So it's in there. It's just not talked about very much.
No, and you're right. You just draw me to Mark 1:35, where he got up early in the morning, went off to a solitary place. So I'm so thankful that you have this practice, because it's needed. Anytime you're able to step back and take some time to yourself, to have self-care and to reflect and to listen and to be silent is good. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And John had mentioned the Zoom study I did last year. The book, it's called Get Your Life Back. And it is a version kind of contemplation. It's a 1-minute pause. And Get Your Life Back, some of the reviews on that book were negative because people thought it was a self-help psychology book, and it's not. It has a faith component to it.
Right.
But his technique of 1-minute pause, and I have that on my phone too as an app, I had to do that today before I stepped back into the room. And it's got phrases and breathing, and it's 60 seconds. And that concept, I mentioned it once before about his work. I think it's John Eldridge. I'm not really good at remembering names, which is good for my line of work. I never remember patients' names, but I also don't remember authors. His concept is, during your day, as you go task to task to task, at least once or twice a day, pause for a minute and recenter. And he has a 1-minute practice and a 3-minute practice. So I do recommend looking at that. If this sounds like it's too much for you to try, 20 minutes is too much, then that 1-minute pause is helpful too. But it's not as restorative for me as doing this. And
yes, thank you.
You're welcome. I can tell when I'm out of practice because I get really impatient. So I put some things in the chat if you want to look into this further. And they're on Facebook like the rest of the world too.
There's a clinical practice. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kimball. Go ahead.
There's a clinical practice in the Indianapolis area, a private practice, counseling practice, that one of their mottos is empty yourself. And I never understood it. I thought, that's weird. I just thought it was strange. Like, what the heck does that mean? You know what I mean? But when you just said it after we did this practice, I'm like, oh, that's where that came from. Okay, that's pretty cool. I just heard it and understood it in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's more of an Eastern practice, really, that a lot of us aren't familiar with, but it's something that we can do, and it actually has value. So.
Yeah, Heidi, I wanted to also offer my appreciation. There were so many wonderful details that you brought in, and I just wanted to illuminate some of them because they really struck home, and I think that they were. I liked the way that you offered sort of the nuts and bolts of doing the practice. And there's one well, you talked about there not being a particular goal, which is so wonderful in so many aspects of mindfulness. We can often be hard on ourselves and feel like I'm not doing it right. Right. So if we don't have a sense or a goal that it's supposed to be like that, we're supposed to have this experience, or we're supposed to feel like this, or we're supposed to get to that spot. And then if we don't get there, then, you know, we're not doing it. So I just love this idea of not having a particular goal, but going with the flow, allowing the process to happen, and being open. So the idea of empty and open, just wonderful.
Yeah. Catching yourself when your mind wanders is doing a good job. You know,
that was one of those other details you talked about. I believe I heard relapse alert.
Reset. Well, I can't remember. I can reset sometimes if I'm really going off on a tangent and I just plan something for 2 minutes in my mind. I'm like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be, you know, that, because you'll get some good ideas during that 20 minutes too. Trust me, you'll go, oh, you know, I have a better way of handling such and such. Like, okay, set that over here and return and empty. And okay.
So maybe that just sparked it for me. But you were talking about how we are going to encounter thoughts, and for you said that for yourself often it's thoughts of planning or thoughts in the future, and that in a way that, you know, as you catch that, it's like, oh, it's kind of like I'm relaxing back into discursive activity, right? And I don't know, I just really, that's what I heard was relapse alert. You know, it's like relapse alert. Okay, open, return, come back. I thought that was
I think you have to be relaxed but alert, like at the same time where you're just relaxed and you're aware of. I remember going to some dairy. I don't know, it was a very busy like farm market somewhere, and there was a guy actually sitting there meditating in the midst of people coming and going and cars in the parking lot. And I looked at that, and I don't know why you would pick that spot to meditate, but I was thinking, how many times does he have to say return, return, return? It's like, pick a quiet place, you know, a quiet time of day, and don't use your energy trying to ignore the whole world around you. I mean, if you have to even put earplugs in because your kids are busy in the next room or something, you know, do that so you're actually healing and spending that time being open. And the more you practice that open and that emptiness, the more when things get really crunch time, wherever you are and stressful, it won't be so hard.
Heidi, I could tell by your mannerisms and your communication that the complexity of your work allows you to come to yourself and have those moments where you're able to just kind of strengthen yourself with all that you see around you. As you do these evaluations and assessments, I'm sure there's a lot of me time that you need outside of work. And now I can just tell you, there's a presence that you have as I look at you and as you explain some of the things that you do. So glad to see the smile and the humor as well, because that's needed as well in the discussion, I'm sure.
It is. Thank you, Daryl.
I was here for the Center in Prayer, which I love and appreciate the intersection between mindfulness and spirituality that Center in Prayer offers. I miss the speaker's background, so I cannot comment. I heard doing some work in the prison. That's all I heard when I got pulled away, so I apologize for that. And it's good to be here.
It's like a prison, but I work in a hospital. Yeah.
you do some volunteer work in the prison? You had mentioned something about prison.
Well, that was an example of how they're using centering prayer.
Gotcha.
I think I've heard in the past they will try yoga, for example, in prison settings. In this case, it's centering prayer. But what I like about it is my impression was their prison outreach group that teaches the centering prayer keeps connected with inmates when they're released to help them practice that skill of staying calm and focused and centered. And because I mean that's a difficult transition too when you're coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was cool when I looked up. I didn't even know they had connection with AA and all the different 12-step groups that they teach this skill too. So I'm like, hey, if whatever works, that's a good thing. But no, I work in the hospital crisis department, and I used to do face-to-face patient evaluations in the emergency rooms, on the medical floors, in our outpatient crisis setting. I did that for many years, and then got more interested in helping coordinate admissions with the providers. So sometimes my crisis skills that I used to use with patients, I'm using with therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists who are not used to hearing about difficult issues like suicide every single day. I am. So they're having a crisis dealing with a patient who's having a crisis. And I'm here to support the provider and help their patient get what they need, which sometimes is an admission into the hospital. So I field those calls all day. And I thought my job was tough, and then we got COVID. So it's a new level of untangling who goes where and who qualifies. And I think I'm used to it now, but that was quite, for all of us, it's been a challenge on how we navigate the world now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You really did set your entire presentation up so well, and sort of, I knew some things about contemplative prayer, but you still drew me in very well and made me curious as to how you were going to lead the practice and setting up your own interest and how valuable and important it's been to you. I thought it was a wonderful presentation, and the silence was fantastic. So thank you, Heidi.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in. It's been wonderful to see you all.
Be well.
Let's say good evening from here we are in Indiana. Take care. Good night.
Good night.